Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at this very interesting session at the SDG7 Global South Pavilion. I am Supriya Gulati. I take care of communications at the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy in India. Um, Today, we are going to have a very interesting conversation on a very hot topic, which is about communications and energy efficiency. Despite being widely recognized as the fastest, cleanest, and cheapest fuel, energy efficiency often takes a backseat on the climate agenda. This is due in part to two key reasons: the challenge of communicating its different aspects and impact in ways that resonate in as straightforward and powerful manner as other clean energy sources and solutions. And communication itself is yet to be seen as a key tool towards energy efficiency progress. In light of this, today we have with us communicators, some journalists, energy professionals, and campaigners from across the climate and energy space to explore the challenges, identify gaps, and explore strategies and key messages that engage specific audiences to elevate energy efficiency in the climate conversation. We also have with us some of the leading communication professionals as our special speakers. Joining us for the roundtable discussion, we have Sherry Kennedy, Director of Communications at Sustainable Energy for All. We have Vaishali Mishra, Director Communications and Advocacy Asia, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, GAP. Gabrielle Peterson, Senior Manager, Global Communications and Public Affairs, International Copper Association, ICA. Dina Capiello, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, Rocky Mountain Institution, RMI. Together, we aim to mainstream communications as a vital driver for energy efficiency progress. This session, which is called the Energy Efficiency Buzz, Leveraging Communications to Power the Climate Wins, is organized by Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy and SEforALL under the aegis of the Mission Efficiency Narrative Taskforce. Thank you so much for joining, and I would now like to invite Sherry to give the opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great COP. I wanted to give a shout out to Supriya, first of all, because I think this is such an amazing idea, concept that you put together. Thanks for bringing us together. We need more of this. When I was thinking about how to speak about this topic, I'm structuring it into 4 buckets. Starting point, reality check, context, and hope. Where are we starting from? For SEforALL, Sustainable Energy for All, we were formed in the UN. We're a brainchild, essentially, of Ban Ki-moon. I think many of you know that. And he thought, you know what, we need to tackle energy if we're going to actually address the climate issue. 3/4 of the world's emissions, et cetera, et cetera. Included in the buckets that we deal with at SEforALL are renewable energy. Also, access is super important because we need to get it right for the first time. 600 million people around the world do not have access to enough energy, clean energy, et cetera. And then the last is efficiency, that's SDG 7.3. Now this is where things get interesting. So for us, in terms of the reality check that I wanted to talk about here, for us we look at efficiency in a couple of ways. One is, on the one hand, we need to ask those who have enough energy to use less, essentially, right? On the other hand, because we know that folks who are doing well across the world economically, they're using the most energy. And then on the other hand, we're asking those who don't have any or don't have enough, we need to tell them that, you know what, you need to use more in order to develop, right? And then it kind of helps all of us. So it's this balancing act that we have to kind of address, and that's a reality check. So just a couple of stats that I think are really important here in this discussion. The per capita consumption of energy in Africa, for example, is 180 kilowatt hours, right? Minus South Africa. Even with South Africa, it gets nowhere near the 13,000 per capita consumption of the US and 6,500 consumption per capita of the EU, right? So right away, we're talking about an imbalance. So that's one thing. And then on the context, we always have to, as communicators, know our audience is obviously, it's been drilled into all of us, but part of that is context. So what context are we communicating in? We've just had not we, I say we, I come from Canada, so I always think of the US. Whatever happens to you guys when you sneeze, we catch a cold, right? So there's a huge, obviously, election that just happened in the US. Everyone at COP is talking about it, of course, that's one. Another context could be, and so we're dealing in an environment right now where there is definitely a trend in terms of populism, nationalism, et cetera, right? So that's one. The other thing is some of us are communicating in areas of conflict, extreme poverty, et cetera, right? So this is really important because we have to know where our audiences are coming from. And so that's kind of context. And I found a quote that I think really kind of encapsulates what we as communicators need to focus on if we're going to move the dial. Because right now we're in an environment where we have to capture hearts and minds. This message is from Anat Shankar Osorio. She is an American author and a political strategist. So she says, good messaging is not about saying what is popular. Good messaging is really about making popular what needs to be said. So this is the environment that we're working in today as communicators. We need to basically say what no one else wants to say, essentially, and then make it land. And I think this is where hope comes in. Right now, things are very divisive. It can easily get negative. So I think in order for us to be on the offense rather than the defense, is that we need hope in this environment. We need to create a vision of what the future can look like that is aspirational and that brings joy, quite frankly. And I think it doesn't mean that we're going to be speaking fluff. It means that we're going to back all of that with data, hard facts, because we're also dealing with misinformation, disinformation. So that's the only way we're going to counter that. And the last thing is bringing us all together. And so forums like this, I think, are critical. And I'm talking more broadly now, but obviously we're going to be focused on efficiency in this discussion. So I'm looking really forward to the conversation to see how we can come together more. Maybe we do this regularly at such fora, and also do it continuously throughout the year. Let's figure out how we can do that. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you on the tactics of how we actually move hearts and minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. So let's get towards the roundtable discussion, and this would be very engaging. We'll have a set of questions that will guide the roundtable discussion. We'll have our key speakers who will first give their remarks on the particular aspect. And then after every question and the speaker input, we will open the discussion for that particular aspect. Following up, from what Sherry said, that we need to talk more on the context and where is energy efficiency in that context. So the first question I want to have for Vaishali, do we really have a unified message for energy efficiency, and where does it stand in the context of the climate action globally?
Thank you, Supriya, and good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful to AEEE and SEforALL, a longtime partner of GIAB, the organization that I represent here today, for inviting me to this very important communications roundtable. It's not often that you see a group of communicators coming together and speaking about things that matter. I'll start off with talking about my organization first. And the reason why I'm doing that is because alliancing and coming together, as Sherry has already talked about, is something that is key to the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. It says it in its name. We're global. We work across the globe. We work in energy and energy transition. We work for people and we care for our planet. And I think in the scheme of things, energy efficiency is a really, really important cog in the wheel. I don't think there is a yes or a no answer to your question, but I do think that a lot of organizations and institutions have started talking about energy and efficiency in the same way, whether it is about energy efficiency improving access to livelihood, cutting down carbon, averting carbon, increasing energy security, and of course, it's cost effective. So that conversation and narrative is beginning to shape up. In fact, last year at COP, when the UAE consensus happened about tripling energy renewables by 2030, energy efficiency did feature very strongly. So there is this growing consensus that energy efficiency is important in pushing the climate agenda ahead. And there was a push for a double annual growth rate. However, I do feel that energy efficiency is not a sexy enough subject to be communicated. It is driven by data and statistics. I think what we miss out is people, and I'll speak a little bit more to that during the later part of the conversation. I think that is what brings in communicators to talk about energy efficiency in a more relatable manner, right? You have to get in the human interest angle, and people are sexy. So I think that is where we need to move our shift in the communication narratives towards that. And also, again, going back to the alliancing and the collective action, I think it is also on us to push messages collectively that speak to innovation, that speak to people. And when I say people, I don't mean just the consumers, who, of course, are the recipients of energy efficiency initiatives, but also the entire value chain, each and every stakeholder. They're all people in the stakeholder, right, in the value chain. So speaking to each of their priorities and aligning the messaging around that, I think that is how I see energy efficiency growing in the climate agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishali. That was very interesting. So I want to, ask from the audience here, do you feel that are we talking about energy efficiency enough? If yes or no, what are we talking about and what are we missing out?
Hi, my name is Smriti. I represent NRDC and I work for the India program. One of the things that I do see is when we're talking about energy efficiency and we're talking about stakeholders at every level, where does social behavior change communication come into play? Because I do see that as a major gap. When we're talking about reaching out and really making a mark, as it were. So is there space to actually build it from the ground up, therefore?
Yes, Nina.
Yeah, could I just, thanks for that question. And thank you all for inviting me to join this panel. I'm not only thrilled to talk about communications, but I'm thrilled to be on a panel of all women, which I think is also rare here at COP. I wanted to just elaborate on the first question, and then I'll talk a little bit about yours. RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, has worked on energy efficiency for 40 years. It's actually, Amory Lovins, our co-founder, is known as the Einstein of energy efficiency. He's pledged that since the early 80s. And one of the main reasons we're here is that I think that, yes, last year in Dubai, energy efficiency was part of the goal. But since then, from our perspective, it hasn't gotten much attention. I really think a lot of the narrative has been on the supply side, build more, build more. A lot, even at New York Climate Week, a lot of headlines on tripling renewables, less on the doubling down on energy efficiency. I think there's a ton of reasons why that is. Let's be honest. 50% of the current NDCs have energy efficiency goals, while 90% have renewable energy capacity goals. Even though, and talking about messaging, I mean, I love this stat from RMI, which is energy efficiency has been responsible for 46% of emissions reductions historically, and has the potential to be responsible for half of future reductions. So it has a huge potential. Now, why is it not talked about, right? That's the question. Especially when the cost savings are extremely significant. I think the sexy topic that you mentioned is one. I was a reporter for 15 years, an energy and environmental journalist for 15 years. I'm an environmental scientist by training. If I got a press release on efficiency, I would literally roll my eyes because it's just really hard to write about. It's really hard to make tangible, which gets to your question, right? It's as simple as things as turning your lights off. I was telling my CEO, I grew up in the state of New Jersey in the USA, and my mom always had this saying, do we own PSE&G, which was like the local power company, right? And that still reverberates in my head to this day. Talk about messaging to make sure that I turn the lights off, right? So I think for a lot of reasons, if it's not in the conversation, right, and people aren't talking about it as communicators, sometimes it's hard to insert it into the conversation. I think, though, we had a press conference earlier this week that talked about the fact that it wasn't getting attention, and got a Bloomberg hit. We're anticipating an AP hit. So I think the more that we can talk about it and get it out there, and especially in context, okay? So let's talk about the transition in the U.S. I'm not going to comment on that. We're a non-partisan organization, but I think that a message that talks about savings, millions upon millions of dollars in savings, is a potent message right now, right? So I hope that helps. I think getting to your question's a little bit harder, right? And we hear that all the time in the climate space. How do you change behavior, right? But I do think this is one thing that individuals can do that's a lot easier than making your house a solar plant, right? And putting solar panels on the roof. That requires a lot of investment that may or may not be subsidized.
Yeah, I think I was going to dive right in because I think you were going to ask me about challenges, and I feel like we've kind of reached it.
Just to address your social behavior, it is totally a behavior change communication. And I think you said you've been looking at the India program, and there's a great example in India, the Ujala scheme, right? That was about changing, shifting from the light bulbs into the LED bulbs. Now, this was a classic example of how behavior change communication at the last mile makes an impact, right? These guys were wondering, why should I be changing my bulbs? They're working just fine. But the communication strategy, because it was geared towards hitting each and every person in the value chain, right, from the business owner to the public distribution utilities and the government, they made it work. And it was because everyone at a local level to the central level, so top down and bottom down, they were talking about it. So it's about also being able to create that noise with the impact that it creates. So I think that was really a classic successful example of behavior change communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think, when we're talking about energy efficiency, all of us, we are coming from organizations who are either directly working on efficiency or indirectly. It's part of our mandate as well. But, coming in from my perspective, as a personal perspective, as a communicator, we are talking about our work, yes. But are each one of us talking about efficiency together? And when you say it's hard, Dina, I want to ask you, Gabrielle, and everyone here, what makes it hard?
Well, I'll say I work for the International Copper Association, and we have a very similar issue, right? We're dealing with something that has, first of all, an issue of awareness. People don't realize that copper's in your wires and your walls, et cetera, and just like that, energy efficiency also has a lack of awareness. If you ask the average person on the street what they think about this, how often they think about this, is this part of their decision-making processes when they purchase? Do they brag about it at parties? No, right? Like, it's not going to happen. Whereas even within our own sustainability community, you might say, oh, I just put solar panels on my house, and you might talk about that, proudly in a group setting. No one's bragging about the energy efficient, refrigerator they just bought, right? So it's partly like a visibility issue. And I would say, so beyond the awareness, it's also very technical, and that has a couple of consequences. Number one, when we talk about technical data, we absolutely, depending on the audience, of course, should not necessarily lead with that. In my opinion, whatever we need to say, we need to lead with emotion. And not everything that we need to say needs to entertain, but it always needs to lead with an emotion about the impact that we're making. So we can talk about the technical aspects, we can talk about the benefits, but what we need to get to is the impact on a human life. And it goes back to this question of why. You know, why should I care? And there's two ways to read that question. Why should I care, which is like all the data, you know, how it's going to affect the planet, the emissions, how it's going to change the world. And then there's why should I care? How is it going to impact my life? How is it going to address a pain point that I have? And so we can tell stories, because the way we're telling the story now, we're telling it about the conflict, right? We're focusing on the problem. We're focusing on the potential of the transformation, but we're forgetting the character. We're forgetting the who in this equation. So depending on the audience, again, and communications always comes back to the audience. I think there's both opportunity for a bottom-up and a top-down approach. We need to reach the consumer. We need to address why this matters to them. If I want to sell someone a refrigerator, I'm not going to say, well, it's got like an X energy rating and it comes in this size and we have an X year warranty. People aren't making decisions based on that as part of the decision, but they're making the decision because I tell them, you can hold on to grandma's recipe just a little longer. Or maybe it's a symbol of freedom for that person because they have a way of knowing that there's food in their fridge that feed their family tomorrow. They don't have to worry about it. They have time for education, and they have time to do other things. So what is this symbol? What are we giving people by giving them energy efficiency? We are changing their lives. We are giving them money in their pocket. We're giving them time back to do other things. We are empowering people. And we have to reach that side of the story and help people understand that they are making an impact, and we have to give them a reason. People want to feel good about themselves too. We have to give them that narrative. We have to give them the story. Now, when you talk to a policymaker, right, you're not necessarily going to tell them that story, but you're going to tell them about the human impact. You're going to say, look, I was able to deliver, you know, you're going to help X number of elderly people because I can keep the COVID vaccine refrigerated for longer. I can help reach rural communities. I'm going to create jobs in your community, right? So you're going to give them the story that gives them a win with their communities and the human impact. So that's where I think we really need to focus, and that in itself is going to raise awareness. We also need to translate these technical issues into something, again, very more relatable. If you ask someone, what does a kilowatt hour get me? Can anyone here explain that in a term that the average person can understand? How many hours of streaming Succession does a kilowatt hour give me? How many hours gaming on Fortnite does a kilowatt hour get me? I don't know. So until I understand what that means for me, I'm not going to see the benefit. Now, I do think there is a place, of course, supported by data, emotion-led, supported by data. You know, one of our partners at United for Efficiency, they made these incredible country savings assessments. So they realized that 5 applications account for more than 50% of global electricity consumption. And if you are able to replace that in developing and emerging economies with energy efficient versions, it's the same as taking half the world's car off the roads by emissions by 2040. And that requires no behavioral change. It just means getting them the right energy efficient appliance. So going back to behavioral change, it doesn't even all have to be behavioral change. And actually, that's something that gives me hope. It's one of the reasons I don't feel so doom and gloom about the climate crisis, because there's so many opportunities. And I think it's much easier to get the right infrastructure in place. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's easier to get the right infrastructure in place than it is to change mass behavior. So that would be my 2 cents on the challenges and some of the potential solutions.
Thank you, Gabrielle. No, very important. You know, it's talking about do we really know our data, and do we as communication professionals know the data well? I mean, that's also one of the biggest challenges. It's hard. It's not easy to understand. And I want to hear from my peers here. You know, what have been some of your challenges in communication in this particular area? Yeah, Karishma.
Hi, I'm Karishma. I'm from CLASP, and we work in the energy efficiency policy space. So something that I face as the communications team member is that we're a global organization. A lot of our data is, from around the world. So how do we craft posts or do content that lands on a global audience and also invokes emotion. Because all the examples that you gave, right, Fortnite, grandma's recipe, like they're all very American-centric. So how does that land on an Asian audience or someone in Africa?
I would say that while context should be specific and adapted to the culture, to the needs, to the point of view, the human experience and emotional experience is the same. The connection you have with your family, everyone can relate to that. Everyone can relate to human relationships. Most people go through, similar phases of life, right? There's coming of age, whatever that might mean in your culture, right? Or there's, different points of those, and you tell that story, One thing we talk about, especially for us with copper, copper's in your phone, so what do you do when you get engaged? You call your mom, right? So, that's copper lets you call your mom. That's like a way of framing these things. So we can do the same for energy efficiency, because no matter where you are, this is going to make a difference for you. And I would go back to the tangibility issue, right? This idea that it's ethereal. We have an opportunity, actually. I think it's an amazing communications opportunity. We are so focused on not being able to touch or see this thing, but because it is in a way ethereal, it is nothing, but of course it's not, but it can be everything. Energy efficiency touches all parts of life, which means we have infinite stories to tell. And for me, it's a marketing opportunity that we really haven't seen in a long time. So let's make energy efficiency sexy, as we say, because it is. You can make a difference in the world, and you can change people's lives, and you can make a difference to the planet and everything else, to the clean energy transition. And we have that opportunity.
I think addressing your question, Karishma, I think every communication strategy has to speak to the region, right, and speak to its people. So you will bring in your regional nuances. But I think what really unifies, if I were to say, is that human connect, right? And that is, I think, what Gabrielle was trying to push forward. So the story could be different. It could be your grandma or your dadi, as you say in Hindi in India. But the human emotion stays. It's also about the nuances of human connection and about emotions. Is the behavior around curtailment? Now, that may not work in Asian countries, right? You don't go around, say, switch off the light. That might not click, right? It is also about the difference between curtailment of efficiency behavior versus, reinforcing positive messages. So I think even within emotions and trying to portray that messaging, you have to be nuanced based on the audiences that you're serving. And this is what every communication person is trained to do, so it's no different for energy efficiency.
I totally concur with all that's been said, and I'm going to say it. I've got team members in the audience. I say this to my team all the time, which is the message has to be the same. How you deliver it depends on the audience, right? I'm going to give you what I think is we're also a global organization. We operate in 60 countries. We have an office in Delhi. We have offices. We're opening an office in Singapore. We have an office in Beijing. For the Global South, and I'm thinking of India in particular, one I think the greatest stories is heat, right? The heat the just record-breaking heat in these cities that is going to require more cooling. And if that cooling is not efficient, you exacerbate the heating problem. And that circular story, right, that the more energy that you use to cool off and make a place habitable is actually going to worsen the heat problem unless they are efficient. So, for instance, we have a wonderful study underway in India on cooling with the Lodha Group, one of the largest developers in India, where we are testing air conditioners. Because, again, they want to be comfortable. Everybody relates to that, right? Huge problem over the Global South. So how can efficiency help you? It can make you cooler, and it can also not make the problem worse. Because it will make the problem worse if we use energy hog air conditioners, right? And so that's a really potent thing. And, we've also done different campaigns. We're also working in India on the Shunya campaign. It's a campaign to electrify 2- and 3-wheelers, where we tapped into kind of the hope, right? So wherever you are, it's In journalism, we used to say, what's the so what, who cares? Every time you go to your editor and you pitched a story, he's like, what's the so what, who cares? And that so what, who cares is for the audience. It never worked, unfortunately, when I said, it's just a really good story. Come on, let me do it. It was the so what, who cares for the audience, always.
Absolutely, Reena, yeah. So while we're talking about the challenges, I also want to hear, from everyone. Yes.
Hello? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for convening this discussion. I'm Marissa Gantman. I work with Dina at RMI in strategic communications. And to think about this question or this question on challenges that we're running up against, and something we've been really trying to think through at RMI is what's new on efficiency, right? Because what's newsworthy? What can we say that's new that's not going to be different and capture attention that hasn't been said by someone like Amory Lovins for the past 40 years, right? And what we've realized is maybe there isn't anything new to say. All the expertise is there, right? The technical knowledge is there. It is a strategic communications issue. It is about finding the right angle, the right frame that we want to put it in that is specific to different regional contexts. And so that's why it's been so exciting for us. And then also, and working here at COP29 to try to create a call to action to elevate efficiency on the global agenda, right, with many of these organizations here. And so that's, I think we've also seen there's, of course, strength in numbers, and we do know on the communication side, just in climate communications broadly, it helps to all be going in the same direction with our narrative, right? Instead of, God forbid, conflicting or, or contradicting each other. So that has been great to see, and I think perhaps something, I know I'm jumping ahead to the last question, but as we think about how we can all work together more in strategy shifts in the communication space to strengthen energy efficiency, thinking about if we have new projects as different entities working in this space and there's something really exciting there, sharing that with each other, and how can we build on that and connect that to our own organizational strategies so that, again, we're all heading in the same direction.
Thank you. I want to build on to that question, when she said, there's nothing new in energy efficiency. The story has been there. So we need to use strategic communications to build it further. Now that you have said it, that it is one of an important tool to drive the energy efficiency progress as well. Do we have enough resources and funds? We're talking about finance everywhere, but do we have enough finances for communications, to talk about this?
Is this for me?
Everyone.
No. Listen, I'm trying to say this delicately. Listen, I am a firm believer that at the heart of the climate crisis is a communications crisis.
Absolutely.
And we have been outgunned and outmessaged. If you compare what NGOs or probably any of our organizations spend on communications, we are just a fraction of
Yes.
what the incumbent industry, the fossil fuel industry, pays. I also think, depending on where you work, there is a real challenge internally to say that communications matters,
Yes.
right? And communications has a unique role to change people's minds and change people's beliefs and feelings to get them to act. Listen, I mean, if we were doing the job that we were intended to do, and I've been at this so long, I remember when the AP Bulletin came out and said, we can now say climate change without having the detractors in the story. I've been at this since the late 90s, communicating on climate. If we were doing our job, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? And what I'm saying is, this has been researched to death. We know what's happening. We know the goals. We know what to do, right? We lack believers, and we are up against people that make things new, right? Woke capitalism, right? Drill, baby, drill. All of the above. All of these things that just roll off the tongue. And a lot of our organizations, and I'm glad that none of my program colleagues are here, do 60-page PDF white papers versus all of the above, right? We need to figure out a way that we make things new and brand them. And I think efficiency is right in this category. I think that the word energy efficiency itself probably needs like a refresh. I'm not sure what it is. I don't have that solved. But I think for our organizations, I know as you know, I have a team. I'm blessed to have a team of 46 communicators at RMI. That I grew from 20, but the only reason that we grew is because we are now advocating for ourselves to be in restricted grants, because I think that we should be central to the mission, because if the white paper's out there, guys, and nobody reads it, we don't change anything.
I think that's a very, very important point that you've just brought out, and it's also interesting because I was working on a proposal in the morning today, and communication featured nowhere in it. It's always an afterthought, right? It's always once the project is out there, it's successful, get the communication guy, get the communication girl in, and just have the message out. I think before we begin to communicate externally, we need to communicate about ourselves internally. We need to do our own PR. I think it starts from us. We need to be champions of communication internally. It has to be mapped into your business goals. We impact any organization's business goal, and this is something on us and on you, program people who are here, to understand and realize that. So yes, funds are not coming in, but I really do think that there is an opportunity, and I do see that opening up. I think SEforALL, RMI, GIAP, I think we are brilliant examples of how we can alliance together, right? And also feed off from each other's work and initiatives. It's always not about amplifying what you are, your program, your projects. It's also celebrating others' projects, right? And that's where it works as well. So you multiply that effect, and internally people begin to see that, and so does the external world.
I love this because if you don't have the cash, which we don't, right? We can only get into restricted funding so much. We're right now requiring at RMI 7.5% of the budget, of every restricted budget, to go to communications. This was a real big fight internally, and I'm happy to talk to anybody here about how we did it. But as we all know, in the philanthropy space, unrestricted is dwindling. So that's a huge change. But our power, and Marissa alluded to this, is in our coordination. Yeah. But that takes a lot of planning that I think sometimes we don't do for the very reason you said, because we're at the 11th hour and all of a sudden like this thing that we didn't know was coming, we need it like in a day, and we don't have a social toolkit for everybody. And then just one last thing.
It's always urgent.
Because I feel like I'm talking too much, which is the first thing I did when I got to RMI, I'll be there 4 years in April, and before that I was at Edelman PR agency for 6 years, is I rebranded us. And internally, we're called the Influence Team. We have a logo that's like riffed off of the RMI logo because we influence hearts and minds. And that was a way to evangelize internally what we do, right? We influence people. And you have to influence people to get them to act.
I think that's so interesting, you know, so from being called as a communications team to the influence team, and that makes a lot of difference for the people who are working in that team itself, right? Yes, Sherry, and then we have inputs from the audience as well.
I feel like this has hit a nerve.
Yes, absolutely.
Now we're getting somewhere in this discussion. Thanks, Dina, that's amazing. So look, I think the internal part is important, and money speaks, actually. So your ability to be able to attract funding, in our case, because that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to move things. If you can show internally your value, then that actually, I think, helps people to see you differently. Oh, you don't just produce PowerPoint presentations. There's like strategy here, right? So that's kind of where I'm trying to get internally, and I love what you've done about rebranding internally. That's amazing. So this is why this discussion is really important as well, because we can get ideas from each other. I think for too long, like within organizations, communications is seen as like the bottom of the pyramid rather than where it should be essentially, right? As in communicating, you know, we direct report to the CEO. That's the ideal scenario. And then everything flows down from there. So I think this is key. If we are going to move the dial, which is what I started with in this discussion, we're going to have influence within our own organizations. And how we do that probably is going to look different for everybody. And then once we have that, then we have the resources that we need, because that's key. We can't do anything without resources. And I know we're all used to dealing with probably very little, doing a lot with very little. We need to rethink that and to try to change it somehow.
I would just add to that, like I've been at COP for the whole week, and I've gone to a number of energy efficiency events this whole week, and not one person has told a human-centered story at any event that I have attended. It's all been data, it's all been policy, it's all been all of these other things. So if we're going to make that jump together as an industry, right, as a group that are advocating for these issues, then it will require that top-down strategy internally to our organizations and a shared partnership and agreement that we need to move in that direction together. So I would say that's one key issue. And in terms of something, you know, is there anything new to say? I think, well, that will in itself be a radical shift. And, you know, the other question I would all invite you to ask, because what doesn't change is the fact that things change. So I would say that the question we can all answer too is why today? Why are we talking about this in this moment right now? Because that will change with time, and then we will have new things to say.
Just two points to that. I could not agree more on the storytelling, but that requires money too. And even with our internal progress, which has been very significant over the last 3.5 years, we still struggle to get money for that, right? And when I talk about storytelling, I'm talking about contracting with freelancers, getting them to write stories from the ground, getting photography, getting videos. A lot of my team is former journalists like myself, because I believe so strongly in storytelling, but it's been very challenging for us to kind of still shift the mindset from like the paper, cliff notes of the paper, aka blog, webinar, right? It's like shorter versions of the same thing. So I look forward to that. And I think the other thing we all should be talking about as comms practitioners, and I've tried to do this at RMI, is let's just fundraise for ourselves. And maybe we kind of combine efforts and go to some philanthropies. Now, I know that has been historically hard. And the reason why it's been historically hard is because of the lack of metrics, right? They want a philanthropy, whoever, name one, just say Bezos, Earth Fund. They want to see what the payoff is at the end, and we're very top of the funnel as communicators. But I do think, talking about context and what happened right now in the U.S. and the U.S. elections, I think there could be an appetite for that in philanthropy, and especially if a bunch of us could get together.
Okay, thank you. We'll take some inputs from the audience, and then we are short of time now, so we'll quickly move on to the next part. Yes.
Thank you. This is Bilal Düzgün from Turkish Ministry of Energy. I am the head of Energy Efficiency Department. I would like to tell 2 stories of mine, which I can say have a failure. Just yesterday, Energy Balance Table of Turkey announced. As an engineer, we immediately calculate our energy intensity. What we saw is Turkey's energy intensity dropped by 4.5%, which is beyond the climate target. So it's quite good, but I sent this message to our press department. The manager said, okay, how can I share this information with our citizen? I said, this is 0.1 to 6 ton of equivalent oil per $1,000, but it's in $2015 prices. So it drops by 4%. It is just engineering perspective. So I still don't know how to communicate with the citizens. This is one of my problems. The second problem what I see, as the ministry, we are also providing some incentives for industrial projects. But application procedure takes like 1 year. I mean, application, reading of the application, implementation, and again, inspection took 1 year. But some of the projects payback period like 1 month or 2 months. What I didn't understand is some engineers, they want the say their directors that they got awarded by the ministry. On the other side, the project payback is only 1 month. Nobody says why you apply for the incentives, because it takes more than 1 year. So this is my second problem I couldn't solve. Maybe I would like to have your perspectives on these topics.
Before we take the responses, are there any inputs, questions? Okay, maybe we can have one response to this and move on to the next part so that we make sure that we are not late. Yes, Dina.
I think I understood the question, and I apologize if I didn't. What I heard from you was a pushback about how to frame the data from experts, which, looking at my team, we get all the time. Let's say it this way. It has to be this way. It has to be exactly like it was in my paper. You can't change anything. One really good way to sort of change that dynamic is to meet them halfway, okay, and say this. I'm going to give you a couple thoughts. One is, can we say it? Can we test it? Can we say it this way and say it that way and look what the engagement rates are on social media and use metrics? Metrics, when you work in a very scientific organization like we have all PhDs, are huge. So fight the misconceptions about communications with how they would fight the misconceptions in their space, which is numbers. And so we do quarterly metric reports. We're now working out metrics for every campaign that we do that kind of look like what they would like, right? That speaks to that audience. They're an audience too. So sometimes just say, hey, let me try it this way. Let's see how it goes. Now, the other thing is internal education. Okay, so we were very blessed. I hooked up my CEO with a bunch of communicators that I know from Yale and from other places in the US that specialize in climate change communications. And finally he got it, although I was like saying it for years, which I don't care. I'm like, whatever the messenger is, let's just make sure this works. And he, at our first all hands for all 700 plus RMIers said, we're gonna start talking like humans. And literally my Teams chat was filled. Like, how did this happen at RMI? This is John Kreitz, the engineer PhD, saying we're going to talk about like humans. And that has now spawned a curriculum that we have internally for our researchers about how to do that. And it started with the research. What words work to inspire audiences to act? And now we're getting into things like the practical things, like search engine optimization, little tweaks that can be made, especially because when we talk about money up here, we don't do a lot of paid, okay? We don't have the money to do a lot of paid. So you're talking about organic. So if you're doing organic posting on social, the only way you're going to get people's eyeballs is to hitchhike on the news or have search engine optimization so they're actually getting those words and you're up in the search. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'll quickly move on to the last part of it. And Dina, you have said, some of the mistakes that we do as communication professionals, and we need to drive a push for ourselves as well. But are there any other mistakes that we see that we as communicators are doing here? Because it's also very important to see what has been some of the failures in communications and then address those. While there are challenges, but there are failures as well. So how do we learn from those, and what are some of the strategies shifts that we need in the communications itself so as to position energy efficiency in the global conversation?
Listen, I think I want to kind of end on a hopeful note, which is this is a start. Right? What's happening right here with all of us. I really do think alignment on message across the NGO community. You pick the issue. We're talking about efficiency today, same problem on methane, same problem on a lot of things, right? Is like death by 1,000 cuts, right? Because the other side isn't bickering about this internally. Right, they're all aligned through the American Petroleum Council into API, API or whatever the trade group is, and they understand the power of it, right? So I think one thing we could be doing better is to not cannibalize one another, because you know what's happening, and it's leading to confusion, right? Because there's so many varied messages out there. The audience doesn't know which one to pick and which one is true, and then therefore they can't figure out what is significant.
I would add to that. We need to stop just talking to ourselves. We talk so much to just our own communities. I love COP. It's a wonderful energy, and I'm glad we have forums like this one, and they are absolutely vital to advancing this and to coming to some sort of unification. But it can't just be the energy conferences. It can't just be COP. And in terms of another, I would say failure, not necessarily failure, but opportunity, would be that we need to also have more inclusivity in these discussions and intergenerational dialogue. I think we need to make sure we're reaching younger audiences, because they're going to continue this discussion going forward, unless things go really well for me in my life, I will still be working in 2050. So if that's the case, then I'm the one who's going to end up responsible at the end of the day for how this goes in a position of leadership at that point in my career, so that's where we need to bring younger people into this discussion. We need to reach them where they are. We need to meet people where they are in these discussions. And that's something we have failed to do, I think, collectively. And I would also just add, though, that we need to also remain hopeful. I think negativity can invoke change as a catalyst. It can invoke action. But you need a place to go from there that people can unite around, that people can have hope for, that people want to work towards. So in our messaging, let's not forget, while we are talking about the crises that are happening and the failures of meeting the, doubling down in this first year, we've already failed to meet the baseline, right? So while we need to talk about that, and we do need to talk about the cost, we need to focus on what's possible. And if people don't feel like this is a possible thing to do, they won't take action. If you feel hopeless, you shut down. So we need to remember that. We need to speak about possibility.
Absolutely, Gabriel. And one of the things that I often say is that gone is the time when we used to say that act to strive, act to survive. It's time for act to thrive. So it's more positive, more hopeful. We need to thrive now. Yeah, Vaishali?
I'm allergic to the word failure. I don't understand failure, because I think everything has a silver lining. If we were not failing, we wouldn't have been here together, right? And I think it's from here that we need to take this collective action onward and forward. And as someone who believes in alliancing, I think that is the true power. If we can all come together, all of us here, and as Dina said, not have contradictory statements and narratives out there, but just speak to one common language, of course, to your point, with regional nuances and in keeping in mind your audience. I think that's the way forward.
Thank you. Any more inputs or comments from the audience? Okay, so I'll take forward from there. We're talking about coming together. So here I'll take this moment to, to talk about the Mission Efficiency Narrative Taskforce. So as a Mission Efficiency as a group of energy, sector, we're bringing together different professionals, and communications is one important part of it. As part of the Mission Efficiency Narrative Taskforce, we're bringing together communicators and media to collaborate towards crafting key messages, which are tailored again to specific audiences, and in particularly we're talking about the governments, the decision makers here, the industry, and also the consumers and the youth. So it comes under the elevate function of the mission efficiency, and as so far, since last year, we have worked on bringing together communicators for charrettes, for the working group meetings, and to come up with a unified messaging strategy. And we hope to have all of you also join us now to continue the discussion. 1 hour is not enough. This is just the start. So that's where we want all of you to keep, stay connected with us, and we take this further. Yeah, so there's some of the work that was done as part of the Mission Efficiency Narrative Taskforce last year. There was a call to action at the COP28 and 29, and also for the doubling energy efficiency progress. There were charrettes in Delhi, Paris, and Lisbon. And then we're working on innovative messaging and campaign approaches and the advocacy work as well. I will, just take a bit of moment, to talk about, some of the key aspects of the narrative task force and what we are trying to push for. It's all about, what we're talking about here is human-centered, the energy efficiency communication and tailored to specific needs and the specific context, and more positive, more hopeful, more emotion-focused, So we need to meet our target audience halfway through or where they are, whether it's the decision maker or the industry or the consumer as well. So that's where we're talking about. And here is the QR code to know more about the mission efficiency and to reach out to us. And I would like to now invite Robert from the SEforALL team to give the closing remarks. Thank you. Yes, Pooja. Okay, one question before we end.
Sorry, this is not about energy efficiency. I'm going to ask you about communications in climate change overall. In my capacity as somebody who works in communications and climate change, this is something I've noticed, and it's something evidenced by the panel that we have here, like you mentioned. It's largely women. Why do you think that is, and what does that mean?
I think I would celebrate the fact that it's all women. I think it's going back to the fact that we are more empathetic. We understand human emotions, but we are also very sharp, right? We also back it with data. So I think the fact that we can multitask, right? So multitasking in pushing messages that resonate, but are also evidence-based reporting. I think that makes us a natural fit for communication. So I like this gender reversal, but being not a pseudo-feminist, I would encourage and invite more men into communications. I think it'll be great to have more men, and we are led by Eric A., my managing director, who's a man and who's doing a wonderful job communicating.
I would just say, I think it's just reflective of public relations and communications in general. One of the first things I recognize coming out of a newsroom, which is male-dominated, the journalism profession, and going in to the largest private PR firm in the world, which is Edelman, was that gender. And I'm not sure why that is. I think it's really interesting in the climate space because at RMI, our gender balance is about 56% women overall in the organization. So it's about 50-50, which is a lot higher, actually, than the climate space in general, right? So there is that dichotomy between women. My team's majority women communicators, and then still male-dominated STEM professions, especially in the space that we have, which is highly based on engineering, climate science, modeling, et cetera.
I think one stat that really drives this message home, I don't know whether anyone has seen the family photo from COP, right? There are 6 women out of 78 men. And of those, the only people who mentioned anything about gender or that kind of like a social side of climate were women. There were 4 messages, and they came from women. I think that's powerful. We have the power to change. So let's embrace it.
I would just add that there's something to be said for getting to be the voice of things. As she said, let's embrace that position that we have, right? On the other hand, let's also caution that some of those disparities within our own companies for the communications programs in general aren't reflective of that gender balance either. So let's make sure that those two don't necessarily go hand in hand and be aware as we make decisions.
Absolutely, thank you. Let's embrace it. But We have Robert here from the SEforALL communications team. Robert, you are our hope. Yeah.
One of the few men who get to speak today.
And I really pulled him in. Yeah.
So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining this conversation. I'd like to say that just based on the conversations that we've had today, the key thing that we should be taking away is hope. Like, we should not see any challenges. We should not see mountains. We should only see plains. And we can only do that through partnerships. I think the second thing that has resonated with us today is partnerships. We should have the same kind of messaging. We should have the same data points. If at all we're able to really craft those messages, those data points in a human-centric way, we can win hearts and minds. I think that's basically what we've been saying today. And the thing that I would like us to also take away today is that by winning hearts and minds, we have to take a multi-channel approach. No one size fits all. Not one type of messaging will resonate with probably policymakers or with consumers of efficiency or energy efficiency appliances. So we need to be really aware. We need to be very innovative. I like the Fortnite idea. My kids love Fortnite. So yeah, we need to really think about how we can be able to speak about energy efficiency. Probably in new ways. I like probably energy efficiency as a term is too technical for people to understand. So how do we really probably dial it down slowly or slightly so that we can be able to even reach more people? The other thing that I really liked from this conversation is the fact that internally, as communicators, we're facing loads of challenges. But as I said, as we're starting, hope. There's actually hope that we can still be able to win those hearts and minds internally as we are winning hearts and minds externally. So we do have an opportunity, and I do like the idea of fundraising as communications teams, getting more money through the door so that we can do more innovative stuff. So that's also something that we could learn from each other. So those best practices that work within different organizations, how could they work within our own organizations where we come from? The final thing that I'd like to highlight is we've come together today to champion for energy efficiency as well as climate solutions. And this is just the beginning. Like, we need to network more, we need to come together, we need to share our contacts. Basically, we need to work closer together. So mission efficiency, as well as the work that the different organizations are doing, we should bring it together. So I'm really hoping, I don't know, Supriya, whether you have a form that people can fill or something where we can get contacts from so that we can continue this conversation going forward. This should not be the end. And I like the fact that we said at COP29, energy efficiency went 10 notches high. Then within a span of 9 to 12 months, it's gone down. So we need to keep up the momentum. And going back to what we've said, we just need to make it more human. Data is great, but if at all we cannot hit the emotions linked to our human nature, then we will be failing. So with those few words, I'd like to give the floor back to Supriya and say, this is amazing. I've been to close to 25 different sessions at COP so far. This is the first all-women panel, so let's give them a hand of applause. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Supriya.
so much, Robert. Thank you, and you said it well. And I want to take this opportunity to give a big shout out to all the communication people who are here and our fellow peers for joining us and making this a start. This is a beginning. And I want to thank Vaishali, Gabriel, Dina, and Sherry, and the SEforALL communication team, along with AEEE's communication team, who helped put this up together. And I want to end with what Sherry started with. Sherry said, we don't want to talk about what's popular. We want to make popular what we talk about. So with that, I want to say that let's make ourselves popular and be seen as one of the important drivers of this particular aspect. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please stay connected. We have your contacts. If not, please share your details with us. And please join the Mission Efficiency Narrative Taskforce. And before we go, let's take a group photograph. Yeah, thank you.